It gives me great honor to introduce our speaker for this morning, our dear brother Eric Richardson. He comes to us from Eagleville, Missouri. He is a 2020 graduate of the Memphis School of Preaching, and he is now preaching at the Eaglesville Church of Christ there in Missouri. He has some of his children here with him on this trip, and his wife Holly could not make it, but she's here with him in spirit. We're looking forward to his sermon this morning. His title is Magnify His Name in What You Do. Come speak to us, Brother Eric.
Good morning. Thankful for the opportunity to speak this morning and be with you. You're 18 years old, and most of your life, your world's been in chaos. One day, a superpower, a man from another country, comes in and takes you away. Takes you away from your family, takes you away from everything you've ever known. You don't know where you're going to end up. You don't know what's going to happen to you. But here you are, put into another land, into a house of eunuchs, around people you don't know. What are you going to do? Are you going to try to run, try to escape? Maybe give up on life. Maybe say, I'm going to live like the prodigal son. I'm in another world. I'm in another area. Nobody's going to know. Or are you going to magnify God's name in what you do? This morning I want to look at Daniel. Daniel was a young man who was put into this world. His world was completely changed. Yet he chose to magnify God's name in what he did. Jesus in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 16 told us to let our light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. For us to magnify, the word magnify in it has that glorifying God. It's putting God above ourselves. It's putting His name and glorifying it among men. For us to glorify God, to magnify His name, we have to be doing good works. And for us to do good works, we need to be doing them about men and the world. Daniel was one who did that everywhere he went. There's so many examples in the book of Daniel. I want to look at two this morning. Two examples of Daniel. Open your books to Daniel chapter 1. The first one I want to look at is Daniel magnified God in what he did in his community. Daniel chapter 1, Daniel's in this house of eunuchs, and he's given a choice. And go with me for verse 8. It says, But Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with a portion of the king's meat, nor with the wine which he drank. Therefore he requested of the prince of the eunuchs that he might not defile himself. Daniel was given a choice here. He had a choice to either eat of these meats and these things that he should not eat of. We don't know what they were. They could have been things that God was not allowing him to eat or to drink of. But he chose to not defile himself. And when he did that, he magnified God. He said, God said, I will not do these things. I will not eat of these meats. I will not drink these things. I'm going to stand to the standard that God has held me to. And therefore, Daniel magnified God. Look what happened. Go down to verse 14. So he consented to them in this matter and proved them 10 days. In verse 15, at the end of the 10 days, their countenances appeared fairer and fatter in flesh than all the children which did eat the portion of the king's meat. By Daniel sticking to that standard, sticking to those morals, sticking to the things that God told him to do in this foreign land, he magnified God. You and I do that today. Think about this world that's around us. And think about Daniel and how Daniel was in this group of people that were in the world. Now, we know of three others, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that was with him, but we don't know if there was any others. We don't read of them. So Daniel was in a group of people, in a community of those that did not know God. By his choice, he magnified God in his community. Jesus tells us to glorify his name among men. And Paul in Philippians chapter 2 In verse 15, it says, to let our light shine in the world. That's exactly what Daniel did. Many in the world do not know God, do they? Some reject God. As much as I've sat down, Caleb and I sit down and study with men in a jail. And the more I sit down and study with them and we talk to them, we find out that they're more focused on this life. They're not thinking about eternity. They're more focused on getting through this life and navigating through this life and striving to please themselves here. We have a job to go out and to show them that, like what it tells us in James chapter 4 and verse 14, that this world is but a vapor that appeareth for a time and then fadeth away. We have a job to go out and to teach them. God desires all men to come to the knowledge of the truth, doesn't he? 2 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 4. We have a responsibility. The things that we do in our communities will either help or hinder God's name being glorified. Go with me to Galatians chapter 5. Galatians chapter 5. Look at verse 22. Galatians 5, verse 22. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. These characteristics are of God. And when we have those characteristics in our life, we're showing God. When we're out in the community, truly loving others, having joy, when we're doing those things among men, we're magnifying God. We're telling the world that I'm going to stick to the standard that God has set for me. I'm telling the world that God is my God. And I'm not going to live in the works of the flesh, but I'm going to follow the works of the Spirit. We magnify God when we have integrity, moral uprightness. How do we do that? It's by being involved in our communities. It's not just going out and talking and saying hi to the person that we see maybe just at Walmart or the grocery store, just saying hi and passing and walking by, but it's building relationships. It's showing them that we love them. It's showing them that we have a joy in our life, and when they see that, they want to have that life too. We sit down and talk to them and show them about God. We may be doing these in events, maybe in sports, and finding things that we're interested in, school activities, fairs, communities, public service, all of these things, being involved in them. When we show that moral uprightness, that integrity, we're glorifying God in what we do. Daniel was one who did that, who glorified God in what he did in his community. Second one I want to look at. Daniel magnified God's name and what he did with those in authority. Now, how many times did Daniel stand before a king throughout the book? I think of Daniel chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2, Daniel here is in a situation. He's already pleasing to the king. He's already impressed him. Now in Daniel chapter 2, the king has a dream. No one's able to interpret. No one's able to tell him what it is. And Daniel is able to stand up before him and tell him that dream. He is able to glorify himself, but what does he do? Daniel chapter 2, look at verse 27. Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, the secret which the king had demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the later days. Thy dream and thy visions of the head upon thy bed are these. What did Daniel do? He didn't magnify himself. He said, there's a God in heaven who does this, not man. He glorified God. He magnified God's name in what he was doing. Not only in this example, you jump over to chapter 4. Go to chapter 4, starting in verse 1. Daniel 4:1, Nebuchadnezzar the king, unto all the people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied unto you. I thought it good to show the signs and wonders that the high God hath wrought toward me. How great are his signs, and how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. His dominion is from generation to generation. This is Nebuchadnezzar. He's speaking here. Nebuchadnezzar is glorifying God. He's magnifying God. Do you think Daniel had a part in that? He did. Daniel influenced a king to magnify God. Some would say Nebuchadnezzar even was converted. Go over to chapter 5. In another case, chapter 5 and verse 14. It says, I have even heard of thee, that the Spirit of God is the gods is in thee, and that light and understanding and excellent wisdom is found in thee. Daniel had a reputation among those in authority, among the kings, of one who had, now the king says here, the power of the gods, but he understood that there was someone mightier than he, that Daniel worshiped, that Daniel magnified. One more, Daniel chapter 6, verse 18. Daniel's going to be, he's thrown in the lion's den. Look what happened to the king, what the king did. Then the king went to his palace and passed the night fasting. Neither were instruments of music brought before him, and his sleep went from him. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste unto the den of lions. And when he came to the den, he cried with a lamented voice unto Daniel. And the king spake and said to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, is thy God, whom thou servest, continually able to deliver thee from the lions? Did Daniel magnify God to Darius? He did. Notice something else. Did he befriend him? Would a king that was not a friend to Daniel worry about him all night? No. They were friends. Notice how Daniel was involved in the lives of those in authority. He was a friend to the king. He influenced a king. He was a man who helped to gain a reputation with the king. He glorified, he magnified God in their presence. He did that because he was involved with them. He was there, finding the opportunities to magnify God. Do we live in a world that needs God? We do. This world needs God more than ever. Are there leaders that we can influence, that we can go and to magnify God's name in their presence so where they can make and change policies and rules? And you may say, well, I can't get to the president. I don't have that opportunity to stand in front of the president. Well, hopefully somebody does. But do you have the opportunity to talk to a congressman? To talk to maybe your state leaders, city leaders, county leaders, law enforcement, even our school boards? How much influence does our school boards need for Christians to be there, for Christians to influence them? What about our law enforcement? How much influence can we have on our law enforcement? We may not be able to change policies. We may not be able to change rules, but we can influence those that can. We can stand before them and magnify God. We can magnify God in their presence. Paul did that many times, didn't he? He had opportunity to stand before them. Daniel was one who magnified God in his community as those around him. And he helped to make a difference in his world. He was one who magnified God to those that were in authority, to help change the lives of the people around him, to help them make the world around him better, just like you and I can do. You and I may not be in a situation like Daniel. We're 18 years old in a foreign land, but Daniel was not in his comfort zone, was he? He was way out of that comfort zone. The question I want to ask you is, how often do we get out of our comfort zones? Our comfort zones are our families. Our comfort zones are our church family. How often do we get out of that comfort zone to magnify God? Jesus told us, let your light so shine before men. Where's the light at? It's shining everywhere in the church, isn't it? Where's the darkness? It's out in the world. The light needs to shine in the world. We need to let our light so shine before men that they may see our good works and glorify, magnify God, which is in heaven. I challenge each one of us that when we go home, we leave this place, we go back to our communities, that we take that light, the things that we've learned this week, we go out into the world and shine that light. Do good works and glorify our Father, which is in heaven. Thank you.